buenas tardes, estimado público. Le damos la bienvenida a esta última jornada del quinto encuentro latinoamericano de introducción a la enseñanza de la arquitectura. Antes de comenzar, solicitamos a nuestra audiencia mantener micrófonos y cámaras apagadas, no interrumpir ni al presentador, ni a la traductora, ni al conferencista. Quien incumpla en esto será expulsado de forma inmediata de la sala Zoom. Si desea hacer alguna consulta al conferencista o hacer algún comentario, utilizar por favor la herramienta del chat. Le haremos llegar las consultas pertinentes al conferencista. Si desea hacer alguna consulta oral, vamos a dar prioridad a aquellos que se manejen en el idioma inglés. El anfitrión le señalará cuándo será su turno para abrir vuestro micrófono y realizarla. Sin más preámbulo, damos por comenzada esta actividad final.
Como bien decía Fresley, es nuestra última actividad final, esta charla internacional que nos dará un arquitecto. Y quiero arrancar con esta antesala de un superhéroe. Sí, un superhéroe. Y es arquitecto. Ante los desafíos, hay que continuar. Como un nómade, como un explorador, sorteando obstáculos, por muy complejos y difíciles, como perder el más preciado de los sentidos, que es la vista. Este superarquitecto, este superhéroe, es Chris Domney. Hace 12 años atrás trabajaba en una oficina particular para otros arquitectos, pero una operación tuvo que removerse un tumor cerebral que dañó el nervio óptico, quedando ciego. Lejos de cambiar el rumbo o ver otras posibilidades, opciones, al mes volvió a trabajar, pero formó su propia oficina, una oficina dedicada a los no visuales, donde muestra los diseños cuidadosos, el detalle, que pueden mejorar el bienestar y la vida de las personas, transformándose en un referente internacional de la arquitectura para los no visuales. Cuando todo esto pasó, él dice con sus propias palabras: tuve nuevas experiencias, reinventé la forma de trabajar, lo que hago y cómo vivo. Gran parte de aceptar mi ceguera tuvo que ver con encontrar y abrazar el desafío. Lo que debemos recordar, compañeros, que la arquitectura no es solo para la vista, es para todos los sentidos del ser humano. No solo existen horizontes visuales, también existen horizontes auditivos, táctiles, olfativos, gustativos y muchos más. Dejo con ustedes a Felipe, a Catherine y Camila para que nos indiquen las características, las mejores condiciones para entender y conectarnos con esta charla que nos prepara Chris Domney. Queridos compañeros, den la bienvenida a Chris Domney y los dejo a ustedes al mando de este hermoso trabajo que viene ahora. Estimado Felipe.
Gracias, profesor. Primero que todo, muchas gracias a la audiencia de toda Latinoamérica que se está conectando justamente ahora. Él todavía no llega y la verdad es que vamos a tener que hacer unas pruebas de audio, así que esperamos la comprensión de toda nuestra audiencia. ¿Qué más decirles? Espero que sea una excelente charla magistral y mi compañera Fetzli les va a especificar más o menos cómo va a funcionar esta conferencia.
Estimado público, ustedes encontrarán en la barra inferior de vuestro programa de Zoom un circulito que dice interpretación, o su equivalente en inglés, interpretación, no sé cómo se pronuncia bien ahí, discúlpenme. Una vez que se active la traducción, ustedes van a seleccionar ahí y les van a aparecer las opciones de 2 canales. Tienen que escoger el canal de español y silenciar el canal original. De esa forma van a ver la presentación de Chris Downey, pero van a escuchar la voz de nuestra intérprete, Camila. Vamos a solicitar que cuando se conecte nuestro invitado, guarden silencio mientras él hace las pruebas, ya se bien los enlaces con la plataforma, e indicaremos una vez que se dé el pase a que él presente, indicaremos cuándo se va a activar la opción de traducción para que ustedes escojan el canal a escuchar. Reiteramos el no interrumpir al anfitrión mientras él está exponiendo, favor no activar micrófonos o van a ser expulsados de la sala, y que si desean pedir la palabra, hacerlo mediante el chat. Nuestros moderadores y anfitriones van a estar al pendiente de eso para entregar sus consultas o cederles la palabra. Eso.
Tengo entendido que todavía no está Chris en la sala, ¿verdad? No ha llegado.
Todavía no se ha conectado a la sala.
Ya.
Y yo creo que esta es una instancia para poder, mientras esperamos que aparezca nuestro conferencista, para dejarles la oportunidad abierta a ustedes para que expresen sus opiniones, o qué les ha parecido el Congreso, o qué fue lo que más les ha agradado. Así que les dejamos abierta la posibilidad de dar sus comentarios en este instante.
Y abran sus cámaras para conocerlos.
Es interesante a lo mejor resaltar que el objetivo de que nos acompañe Chris al final tiene que ver con la gran pregunta de la arquitectura tradicional, desde lo visual a lo no visual. Y la arquitectura es la unión entre lo visual y lo no visual. Y por eso Chris está al final de las ponencias. Es interesante reflexionar en este quinto encuentro para entender cómo damos un paso más adelante en la enseñanza de la arquitectura en Latinoamérica. También quiero remarcar que Chris nunca da una charla para Chile. Esta es la primera vez que lo hace y también nos sentimos en una forma honrados por su visita, en este caso telemática. Esperamos que nuestros colegas y estudiantes tomen esta oportunidad de hacer preguntas al invitado internacional.
Está ofrecida la palabra, compañeros, para que puedan manifestar sus inquietudes, sentimientos, qué les pareció las conclusiones que se expusieron en la mañana, si quieren aportar algo más en esa línea, en ese sentido, ¿verdad? ¿Qué ideas a lo mejor falta por contar, por exponer? Todos vamos a poder verlas por la plataforma, las charlas vamos a poder tomar nota, van a estar a disposición de todo el público. Pero en este momento, ¿qué está pensando cada uno de ustedes? Es muy importante.
Ahí en el chat vi al profesor Saldaña, de Sonora. Maestro, usted que tuvo una ponencia maravillosa en una de las mesas, ¿es posible escuchar sus reflexiones, maestro Saldaña? No sé si nos escuchas, maestro. No, no nos escucha. Bueno. Y profesor Tenoch, desde Guadalajara, ¿es posible contar con vuestra reflexión, profesor?
Sí, cómo no, muy buenas tardes a todos. Con el gusto de saludarlos. Había estado presente, pero por medio del mismo canal de nuestra universidad. Entonces, me han parecido maravillosas todas las reflexiones, las conferencias. Creo que hoy más que nunca nos hace falta una reflexión sobre modelos pedagógicos que debemos implementar, sobre todo para nuestra carrera y nuestro sistema de enseñanza-aprendizaje de la arquitectura. Creo que al ser una carrera creativa, al ser una carrera sensitiva, como bien lo han mencionado varios de los ponentes, y el perceptiva de todo, de todo su entorno, como lo dijo la maestra Úrsula hoy en la mañana. Creo que nos hace falta reflexionar en ello y compartirlo y verlo con los alumnos. Creo que es primordial con ellos más que nada, provocar esas sensaciones que se han olvidado, creo que últimamente mucho por las herramientas digitales, ¿no? O sea, y no estoy peleado con ellas, pero creo que nos hace falta. Y felicidades a todos. Roberto, es un gusto, de veras un gusto muy grande que hayas organizado esto. Nos hace falta una reflexión continua.
Gracias, maestro. Esto es un trabajo de equipo. Gracias.
Así es.
¿Sí?
Ya contamos con Chris Downey en la sala. Le damos el pase a Felipe para que se comunique con él y solicitamos por favor guardar silencio mientras se hacen las pruebas técnicas.
Gracias, Fretzi.
Hi.
Hi, Chris. How are you?
Good. How are you?
Pretty fine, thank you. So right now we're live, but we're want to check out all the things like sound and maybe the devices you want to connect.
Right.
Your presentation. How are you gonna present it?
Magic.
But is it PowerPoint or something?
Yes,
Are you going to share? Are you sharing screen?
Yes.
That's okay. So everything is fine. Do you hear us okay?
Yeah.
So
I just need to. I want to make sure I can get over there and make sure everything's being shared properly, because I need to also share sound. So I need to make sure that that's working properly.
Okay, so you tell me when you want to start, and that's it. We'll introduce you to the audience.
Okay.
So when you're ready, you tell me, and then we're gonna speak in Spanish just a little bit, just to introduce you, and then it's your turn. It's okay?
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah. So let me try to share the screen and make sure you're hearing my audio.
Sure thing. We're listening you.
Okay.
Share screen button to act alert. John H. Martinez, join. Alt tab. Zoom. Alt tab. Launch meeting dash Zoom dash Google Tab. FW presentation on Friday 27th of Alt tab. 00 dash 5 Latin American const .pptx dash PowerPoint ready. 00 dash 5 PowerPoint slideshow dash left bracket 00 dash 5 Latin American const .pptx. Slower.
So are you seeing my screen?
Yes, we are.
And are you hearing the computer?
Slide
Yes,
2.
we do.
Architectural office.
Yes, we do.
Okay, excellent. That was easy.
Slide 1. Chris Downey, AIA. 5th alert. Leo Alvarado Pickens has left the meeting. 5th. Alert from Quinto Encuentro Latinoamericano Arquitectura to everyone. Y si encuentra disponible la traducción al español.
All right, so should I stay on screen share, or should we just go back to it when it's time?
I don't know. I think it's fine for us. Just like that. If it's easier for you.
Alert. Isabel Rivera has joined the
Doesn't
meeting.
matter. It was pretty easy. So if you want to go back and forth, that's fine.
Sure. So let's go back, please.
Okay.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. And let me know if you need me to stop sharing here, or if you can take it over from your
Alert.
side.
Andrea Martinez has left the meeting.
Would you take
Alert.
it
Fernando
off,
Dodson,
please?
Alt tab. Slide 1. 00 dash Alt tab. Task switching. PowerPoint slideshow dash Alt tab. Meeting controls. Tab. Mute. Currently muted. Buttons. Alert. Isabel. Shift tab. Stop share button to activate. Press space. Space.
Okay.
Sure. So now I'm going to start speaking in Spanish and then I'll pass it to you. Okay, is it fine?
Yeah.
Okay. Muy buenas tardes a todo el público latinoamericano. Desde a nuestros oyentes desde México, Costa Rica, Panamá, Brasil, Colombia, Argentina, el Perú, Bolivia y todos los países hermanos latinoamericanos. Es un gusto para mí y para toda la organización del Quinto Encuentro Latinoamericano poder presentarles a ustedes a Cristo. Quiero recordarles que justo abajo en el icono que parece un mundo está la opción de interpretación, donde ustedes por favor cliquen y vayan a la opción en español, si gustan, si no pueden seguir escuchándonos en la versión inglés. Voy a dar un pequeño, solo 2 segundos para que lo hagan, por favor, por mientras estoy hablando, háganlo, por favor, para luego comenzar a hablar en inglés. Muy bien, so with no further ado, I introduce you Chris Donnie directly from Oakland, California, United States. Thank you so much for being here, Chris.
Well,
It's a pleasure for us.
It's a pleasure to be with you. And I'm sorry we can't be together in person, but thanks to technology, we can be together virtually. It's far better than nothing.
Exactly. It would have been a pleasure for us to have you here in Chile.
Wow.
But someday it'll happen.
Right. Look
So
forward to it.
it's the audience, it's all yours.
Okay. I want to share the screen. So let me. Okay, let's see. All right, so imagine everybody can hear my computer and see the screen. I'm going to slow down the synthetic voice on my computer so you'll be able to better understand it. Thank you so much for this opportunity to speak with you today. It is quite an honor and privilege to be here and to speak to you about sort of the work that I do and the situation that I've worked through. And so it's really sort of, I'll be sharing a lot about sort of what I've learned about architecture since losing my sight and my efforts to continue working in it. But really more about sort of that essence of architecture that I've learned in different ways. So I am an architect. I have 2 degrees in architecture, including a master's degree in architecture from University of California, Berkeley. And I started the practice of architecture back in the early 1980s. So I'm getting up there. And I actually had about 20 years of experience in doing all sorts of things, from a principal in a major design firm in San Francisco. I had launched my own firm. I then sold that partnership and was working with a really exciting young company doing prefabricated modular homes that were green, sustainable, all sorts of wonderful things. I'm really excited about it when I was unexpectedly diagnosed with a brain tumor that required surgery. And so at the age of 45, I went to the hospital, had my surgery, and shortly thereafter, while still in the hospital, a couple days later, my sight failed. And within about a total of maybe 10 days after the surgery, they told me there was nothing more they could do to try to restore my sight, that I was officially blind. That was my new normal. And it wasn't until then that I really gave that any thought. I thought for sure they would solve the problem. I like to think of myself as a happy-go-lucky guy, and it didn't think it would happen to me. But there I was. There was nothing more they could do. And at that time, I had to think about, life, not just my own, not just work, but life in general. And I apologize, you all are hearing every person that's joining the conference is being read through my screen reader. There's nothing I can do about that. Hopefully it's not too disturbing. So
we're not listening, so don't worry.
Okay.
Even though you're not sharing screen, is that okay? I mean,
I'm not. Okay, let me.
Okay.
Stop share button to activate. Press spacebar.
So now I should be sharing.
There we go. Yeah. Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that.
Don't
So
worry.
now you will have to listen to my synthetic voice call out everybody that joins as we go.
Tab. PowerPoint slideshow /left bracket 00 -5 Latin American const .pptx right bracket ready. Slide 3.
Okay. So is that
slide 4? Insert new operating system. Slide 3. Slide 3. Hospital bed surrounded by questions.
Being there in the hospital after the doctors had told me there's nothing more they could do to restore my sight, things started to weigh down on me to think about what that meant. And I had hardly had time to really start answering any of those questions, or much less even ask the question, when a social worker joined me in the hospital room. Nobody else was there. And she was there to talk about all the things I needed to do about paperwork and official things to do now that I lost my sight, was a person with a disability. And in that conversation early on, she said, and I see from your chart that you're an architect, so we can talk about career alternatives. I didn't hear much else she had to say. The idea that already it hadn't been 12 hours, it had hardly been 6 hours since I had been told that I was now blind. And all of a sudden, walls were being built around me. Assumptions were changing, expectations were falling away. And, it was a little irritating, but it was a significant question. What am I going to do about being an architect without sight? I actually knew very little about blindness. I didn't know anybody that was blind. I certainly had never come across an architect that was blind. Never read about one, never studied one, just had never come up. That thought had never crossed my mind. So it was a significant thought. And, but, I did have 20 years of experience, and I knew there was a lot in the profession that I could do. But then there was a number of things that I wasn't quite sure how I would go about doing them. So I did leave the hospital with high ambitions, with an eagerness to get going. And in fact, I would return to the office exactly 1 month from the date of the surgery to start figuring it out, to see what I could do, and to take advantage of being in that environment, working with people, creative, excited, optimistic people, to try to figure out what was possible.
Slide 4, insert new operating system.
But it's not that easy. It takes a lot of training. And unfortunately, you can't just download the new operating system, the new non-visual operating system. There's a lot of training you have to do. Everything from just basic safety to living skills, and learning Braille, and learning how to use technology in new non-visual ways, and also learning new ways to get around. So I don't want to go through all that, but there are a couple things I want to talk about. A critical one was adaptive technology. Luckily for me, at the time I lost my sight back in 2008, there's an awful lot of technology that was available to me that, had I lost my sight just a few years before, or 20 years, certainly 20 years before, that there's a lot more possibility than there had been without the benefit of technology. So that created all sorts of new opportunities. And being here in the San Francisco Bay Area, that put me in sort of the nexus as sort of a lot of the most exciting, most aggressive new approaches to adaptive technologies, accessible technologies, and with lots of really expert people to assist and help me along the way. So I was well poised with that, but had a lot to learn within that area.
Slide 6, orientation and mobility training.
But another thing that was really helpful and important was what's referred to as orientation and mobility training, or as they call it in the business, O&M. And it's learning to get around effectively, safely, efficiently with the use of a long white cane. And it's, it does a lot of really critical things about finding steps, finding curbs, holes, walls, columns, all sorts of things that might be in your path of travel as you move through space. But it does a lot more than that. And what I found was that it's a really passive, simple tool with you as a very active user, using it to interpret the environment around you as you move through space. And that really formed a lot. It was a really interesting thing. And as I said, it's a way of interpreting the environment. And it was almost as if I started relearning architecture. I was going through spaces that I knew visually, places that I knew very well, but I was experiencing them without sight and finding out what else is there in architecture to be perceived, to experience, and eventually to design with. And all of a sudden, it started to be less about sight loss or what's referred to as the deficit model, and more about what else was out there, what more was there to be experienced, to enjoy and know about architecture that I had been missing when I was sighted. So it wasn't about deficit, or at least not the deficit I had when being sighted. I was starting to become more surprised by the deficit of what I experienced when I was sighted. So there's a little bit of a twist on things. But, and over time, things went along pretty well. I was doing well. I got mobile pretty quick, was out and about. In 6 months, I was moving through town on my own. And then, was gaining confidence and comfort with it all. And it was maybe a year and a half later that I was walking through the streets of San Francisco, and my mind started to wander. And which is unusual, it caught my attention, because if you're new to sight loss and new to walking around town without sight, with the benefit of a cane, your mind does not wander. You're really focused. You're really focused on everything around you, trying to pick up on all the clues so you could move about safely and efficiently. But my mind was wandering. And what it went to was this idea that, it's been a long time since I've had to get out of anybody's way when walking down the sidewalk. When I was sighted, I used to always think how, I would, walking down the street, I was always that person who got out of the way of other people walking towards me. And it was like I was really miserable at the game of pedestrian chicken. Imagine you all have heard about the game of chicken. Two cars drive at each other. The chicken's the one that steers off the road. It's the first one you give. I was always that person. I was always diving out of the way. Even when I was probably in my right to stay where I was, I just couldn't help myself. I was always the one that would get out of the way. And I was like, Downey, you got to man up. You got to hold your ground. Let somebody else get out of the way for a change. But I just couldn't do it. It was just against my nature. But then without sight, I didn't have to do that anymore. I wasn't diving out of the way.
Slide 8, badass chicken.
I had become the badass chicken. I didn't get out of anybody's way. And I had friends tell me, yep, you got people jumping out of your way, running out of your way, swinging around parking meters, slamming up against buildings, whatever it takes for them to get out of your way. And so it's what was interesting about that for me was I was the same person. I hadn't changed at all, other than I couldn't see anymore. But my position in the city, my place on the sidewalk had changed. But it still felt like me. So rather than being the badass chicken,
Slide 9, my avatar.
it was more like I had an avatar that I was going about in this new space, behind eyes that didn't see, armed with a cane, a new tool, working through the environment. And with that, it sort of gave me this sort of experience. It was, it's like this extreme empathetic experience of walking in someone else's shoes, but walking behind someone else's eyes, or eyes that just didn't see. And what was interesting about it was I had this kind of detached relationship. I could still think as a sighted person and very much as a sighted architect. After all, I'd had so much training and so much experience with sight as an architect. I knew all that stuff. I knew how to do that, and I knew what it meant. But I was experiencing architecture in a different way and thinking about architecture in a different way. And it was really through this kind of detached relationship with this avatar, my blind avatar, as an architect and as a person moving through the city.
Slide 10, outside.
And with that, all these things that I was learning through this blind avatar, through the experience of being blind, were things that I started referring to as outsides. So let's see.
Outsides.
So I was talking about outsides and insights that I've gained since losing my sight, and I'll pick up there. And in particular, thinking about architecture. At the core of architecture, we like to think of it as being a very visual profession. That it's all about what you see, the look of the things we do. But in essence, it's at the core of architecture is the creative process. It's not what we see, it's how we think. It's an intellectual process. And in fact, no architect sees their idea in the real world. It happens in their mind, in their brain, as they're making sense of the situation. And as they're understanding the project, doing the due diligence, studying things, it's all about how you make all those connections, how you problem solve, how you create. It's an intellectual process. And in reality, the visual stuff, that's how it gets done. Those are the tools that sort of develop the ideas to test, mature, evolve, and really perfect those ideas and concepts to make it all work, and then to communicate it with others to get built. So if the creative process was still intact, all I really needed were new tools, new ways of working in non-visual ways.
Slide 13, embossing printer.
And critical to that was a new tool, an embossing printer, a printer that can take drawings created by other architects, other people, sent to me via email or something else, that I then can send to the printer on my own and get prints
Slide 14,
that are embossed. They're drawings printed in tactile form that I can read through touch. So it's the same thing. In fact, the drawings, the PDFs, look just like any PDF you're used to seeing on the screen, only when it goes through my embossing printer, it doesn't print ink, it embosses the paper to make it tactile, so I can read it through touch.
Slide 15, 86.
But that only reads what is in the drawing. For me to participate in that, there's nothing I can do to draw in the computer myself. But what I've done instead is to primarily work with a kid's craft toy, Wiki Sticks, wax sticks. Sticks that I can take, they're flexible, they easily curve, they fold, they stick together. You can work in 2 dimensions or 3 dimensions, not so well in 3, but really 2 dimensions. And as you work with it, since it's wax, they get a little sticky. You can actually stick it right to the paper. So it's just like having a trace overlay, rolling out tracing paper over a drawing and sketching a new idea on top of it, only it's a tactile line, the wax, on top of the tactile drawing, the embossed drawing on the paper. So it's very much the same thing, just done a different way with new tools. So then to be able to have that conversation, to share that with other people, I typically work with architectural firms elsewhere around the country or around the world, and I can just email photographs of those drawings that I've created and share them that way. Or we can have Zoom conferences, and we can show them in real time what's happening or explaining or exploring ideas together. Or in the pre-COVID days before the pandemic, we could meet in person and we could all work together using those wax sticks to explore ideas. So it was a really good way of working, and thanks to technology, I could share that with others remotely, and they could send drawings back that I could then test and continue the process, the iterative repeating process of the architectural design.
Slide 16, access the design process.
And what was interesting about that was not only did it create access into the work for myself, over time, I started to specialize in projects for the blind and visually impaired and people with disabilities. And in this case, I was working with an agency that does provide services for people with all disabilities. They employ people with disabilities. They service people with disabilities. They train people with disabilities. And their executive director was blind, had been blind since birth. And so I was able to make the process accessible to her as the client, the person in charge at this agency. And she was able to have agency over the process, over the architecture. So she understood what was going on and didn't have to rely on other people to describe the visual things, the drawings that she couldn't see.
Slide 17, architecture beyond sight.
So all of this sort of points to the idea of sort of taking architecture beyond sight, something that I never thought about before. And it was really about taking things further, whether it was the idea of architecture, the way we think about architecture, or the way we do architecture. So it was really a different approach, and it wasn't about deficit. It was about bringing something more to the experience of architecture.
Slide 18, architecture of the senses.
Fundamental to that was really sort of an approach of architecture in the senses. It was about multisensory design. If you don't have sight and you're trying to experience architecture, you're trying to move through architecture, you're trying to use it, visit it, do whatever, it's your tapestry, it's your environment for living and working. If you're going to do that, you need other information to be experienced, things other than sight. If we only think about sight when designing, and then someone without sight encounters that space, the chances are there's not a whole lot to work with. There'll be things that are just accidental, and it might work, it may not. So it was really thinking about how can we design more intentionally, more strategically with other senses to share that information, to share the experience of the architecture, to make it something more, much more than visual. And after all, it's not just about, architecture isn't about the eyes in space or the photograph in the magazine or on your screen on the computer. It's about the body in space, the person in space. It's really for that person in the space, using it, using the architecture, and being sort of there alive in all their senses and all their being to enjoy the architecture and use the architecture.
Slide 19, sense of hearing.
So I'd like to go into some of these in more detail, not all of them, not all the 5 primary senses, but I'd like to really focus in on a few, and in this first one, the sense of hearing. And you know, there is a myth that if you lose one sense, your others get more acute, they get better. So in losing my sight, my hearing didn't get any better, but I did learn to listen better. I did learn to listen to the environment around me. It's part of the training that I went through. And it's an evolving thing that just, it increases over time with the more experience you have. And it's really important because you can learn so much. And it's like the sense of sight. You can hear things in the environment that are beyond your reach. So it's another way of expanding your awareness beyond your body to be aware of what is happening in the environment around you.
Slide 20, use local interrupt sound lab.
But that's a really difficult thing to work with. Something that architects don't really work that well with. We don't necessarily design the acoustics of space very well. In fact, we might work with acoustic engineers to separate the sound from one room to another or from the inside to the outside to make sure that the mechanical equipment isn't loud, isn't disruptive to people inside the space. But we don't really think that much or design that actively with the quality of the sound in space. And partially because it's really hard to draw sound. How do you do that? How do you draw sound? When you're rendering, doing your photorealistic renderings of a space, this exciting new building you've designed or the lobby space or whatever, you can draw and model what it looks like, but how do you draw or model what it sounds like? Luckily, I was introduced to a group in San Francisco, Arup Engineers. They're an international engineering company. They have an acoustic group, and what they refer to is the Sound Lab. They developed a process where they can use Revit models, BIM models, and you work with all the three-dimensional and material attributes that are in the space. And just like people use it in three-dimensional rendering, they can use basically like radiance to show the reflectance of light as it bounces into space, only they're modeling the bouncing of sound, the crafting of sound, the modeling of sound in the space. And so they use these three-dimensional models, and you can go into their sound lab and hear what that space will sound like once it's built. And the benefit of that is that you can change materials. You can add carpet to the floor. You can sculpt the ceilings, the walls in different ways. You can change the shape. You can do all sorts of things, and you can hear the difference, compare one to another while it's still in digital space. Yeah, they were doing that for music halls, for convention centers, for theaters, and other high-end spaces where they were really concerned about the quality of the acoustic experience. And as a blind person introduced to this and their technology, I was interested in if we could hear the building and if I could start designing the soundscape of a building, design what it's like to move through the space, and if you could start recognizing the building and understanding it in its acoustic performance. Things about hearing the proportions of space, having an idea of where to go next or where the opening might be in the wall to go on to the next space. Things that if you're blind, you can't see. You're listening to the environment, you're listening to the architecture to understand where to go next. So you don't listen to the sound of the tapping sound off the tip of your cane. You listen to the sound as it leaves your cane, hits surfaces and comes back to your ears, and it starts to basically give you the shape of the space. And you can start to work with that to understand how to move through it. So I wanted to use that as a tool to design actively with that space. And so we started exploring that.
Slide 21, Lighthouse reception on floor 10.
The first place we had an opportunity to explore that was in a project for the Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired in San Francisco. They're an agency that provides rehabilitation training for sight loss, people experiencing sight loss. In fact, it's where I got my training when I lost my sight. So it's for people that experience architecture without sight. The agency, they train people that are blind, and half of their staff are blind. And so it's a very deep blind community that's really serving that people with visual impairments. So it's something they were really interested in, and it was a great opportunity for us to use this acoustic modeling for our first real project.
Slide 22, raw acoustic condition.
So in this modeling, the first thing we did was we modeled sort of the experience. We had an idea of what we wanted in the lobby space when you first encounter the lighthouse, they're located on the floors 9, 10, and 11 of an 11-story building in San Francisco. So when you get off the elevator, we wanted to sort of step inside the lighthouse, and we wanted it to be exciting, full of possibility, not full of dread, not full of sorrow. This is a place to be rekindle, to reignite your life. It was to be exciting. So we wanted it to be lively, acoustically lively, but it needed to perform well. You needed to be able to understand. Since you can't see, you have to be able to understand the spoken word. A concept in acoustics, it's referred to as speech intelligibility. And that's really important to do. So anyway, we needed to hear the space, and we needed to have good speech intelligibility. So to do this, we used the acoustic modeling in the Sound Lab. And the first way we modeled it was the space without a whole lot of acoustic treatments, very raw, concrete on the floor, concrete ceiling, plaster walls, and just the basic treatments. And we use that as the baseline. And this is what that space sounded like in digital space as I walk out of the elevator virtually, and my cane is tapping on the floor, and I move through the space, and you can hear the changing of the tapping sound. And also you can hear people in the space, dropped in the space virtually, and the receptionist saying hello. So anyway, let's listen to it.
Raw acoustic condition.
Good morning. Welcome to the Lighthouse.
I'll stop it there. As you can tell, there was a lot of reverberation. It was hard to understand the receptionist. So anyway, that's the raw condition.
Slide 23, preferred acoustic condition.
The next is sort of to the other end, the preferred condition. And that's, we have a wood slat ceiling, and then we have insulation above that, sound attenuating insulation. We have carpet on some areas of the floor, on the seating area to the right, the reception area to the left. And down the center of the space, there's a concrete path, a polished concrete circulation path that's intentionally left concrete so that you could hear cane taps and footfalls. And as we look ahead in the space, there'll be a stair, and you actually won't be able to hear that. They didn't model anybody walking up and down the stairs, but it was really, it was designed so you could hear people walking up and down the stairs. So you could, if you could see it, you knew a lot of what was going on. If you couldn't see it, you could get other cues to understand the architecture in the space around you. But let's listen to this next model to hear what that sounds like. And you'll be able to hear the difference in the voice of the receptionist when he welcomes you to the lighthouse. And perhaps you'll be able to hear the difference in the cane. That's a little bit more subtle, but anyway, let's listen.
Preferred acoustic condition.
Good morning. Welcome to the Lighthouse.
Anyway, you could hear the difference there. It's hard. It's not as successful hearing it through your computer as opposed to being in the Sound Lab, which has a very high-end, what they refer to as ambitronic sound. So sound is very three-dimensional, it's spatial, things are coming to you with that directionality. So anyway, but it gives you an idea of how that works.
Slide 24, photo of teaching kitchen.
And we also used the acoustic modeling for work in the design of the training kitchen. They train people how to cook without sight there at the lighthouse. And if you're blind, working with other students nearby you that are blind, it's really important that you be able to hear what you're doing. And you especially want to hear the person's knife when they're chopping vegetables right next to you. So it's important to be able to hear the instructor. And we did a lot of modeling there. I won't share with you the modeling for that to make sure that worked well. But
Slide 25, sense of touch.
Worked very successfully.
Sense of touch.
So next I want to go into the sense of touch, which is obviously really important, but we don't go around sort of touching everything we pass. That's not the blind experience. But it's a very tactile experience. Just like I explore drawings through touch, there's a lot of things we have to do with touch. But
Slide 26, feet on the beach.
More importantly, I want you to expand what you think about touch and think about what you feel through your feet, in your body, the skin, all the skin of your body as you move through space, all sorts of things that you're experiencing, you're touching, and you're learning about the environment around you. So expand that way of thinking about touch.
Slide 27, prosthetic touch.
And in the case of the blind using a cane, the cane is actually a tool. It's a prosthetic device and besides finding steps, holes, trees, all sorts of things in front of you, you're also using it to tap on the ground and hear the space around you, but you're also feeling the surface, the ground plane that you're walking on. So you start to recognize the difference of what concrete sidewalks feel like, a wood floor, bricks, asphalt, all sorts of things. You start to recognize that through the haptic feedback, through the cane, as the tip of your cane glides across the surfaces of those materials, that vibration goes through the shaft of the cane and enters the grip of your hand, and you're getting that information, which can be really important as you move through space, as you recognize where you are in your daily life, your daily patterns, and even in places that you don't know, places you're experiencing for the first time.
Slide 28, Salesforce Transit Center rendering from above.
So in another project that I've worked on, the Salesforce Transit Center in San Francisco, this is a 4-block long transit facility in San Francisco, primarily focused on bus transit coming in from the East Bay, Oakland, across the San Francisco Bay into San Francisco and into this facility. So commuters, daily commuters coming in and out of town every day, going to work. And so it's a 4-block long site. And so my job was really to deal with the blind experience in and around this facility. All sorts of things at the street level. On top of the building, there's a 4-block long city park on top of the building. There's retail on the first and second floors. There's a municipal bus system that on the ground at street level at the east end of the building that then takes people in buses throughout the city of San Francisco as they transfer from the Transbay buses after they came across the bridge. So there's a lot going on, and in the future, there'll be trains underground coming into the station. So a primary area of concern was on the 3rd level. That's the bus deck. All the buses coming from the East Bay come off the Bay Bridge on an elevated roadway into the side of the building on the 3rd floor. And from there, there's a 4-block long bus platform with people at the center going to the outside of the platform to come and go from their buses every day. So.
Slide 29, Salesforce Transit Center bus deck.
So this is an enlarged plan, just a section of the bus deck on level 3. And I've enlarged it just to come into a particular area so we can sort of explain some of the things that were done. There's a real challenge of how one would walk up and down the length of this 4-block long platform without sight. There are a lot of obstacles in the way. There wasn't a lot to work with to understand how to go straight up and down the system. the acoustics would not be supportive of that. The sides of the platform were undulating for the buses to come and go off either side of the platform. So it was a mess. Working with it, I found a way, so 2 lines that would go the entire length on either side of the platform that you could follow to go the whole length. And we made that into a series of grooves cast into the concrete to provide this line that you could follow to go up and down the length of the platform. And it was important because the lead architects, Pelley Clark Pelley, in the city wasn't interested in having really overt tactile guide strips on the ground, providing that kind of guidance. But this was a way that it could be integrated into the architecture and be seamless within that.
Slide 31, texture path.
Next, we then created a texture path that was sandblasted concrete, so that it formed a path that would intersect those tactile lines that would then connect the top of the stairs and escalators and elevators to those tactile lines to go up and down the length. So that really would alert you if you came in the morning, were following those tactile lines. Once you came to the textured path, you would know you could then turn inward to find the stairs and escalators.
Slide 32, bus pylons.
And all that would connect those vertical transportation, the stairs and escalators, to where you needed to go for your bus pylons to take the bus that you're looking for at the end of the day. So it was really a system that connected those points of interest and need.
Slide 33, MIT Fitness Room flooring.
And another project, the National Industries for the Blind, a building in Alexandria, Virginia, we used differences in the ground for tactile cues. In this case, in their fitness room, to make it clear where the circulation area was in the midst of all the workout equipment. Things that if you're blind, you could walk into, and it could be all sorts of things at odd levels. We have things in our codes that prevent things protruding into space or low head clearances that you might bump into. But when it comes to fitness equipment, those rules don't apply. And it can be really hazardous to be walking around and accidentally hitting them, especially if they're moving, if somebody might be using them at that time. So this was a system that made it clear through touch and the visual difference that you were in the main circulation area or in the workout area. You could feel that with your cane or feel that underfoot.
Slide 34, prototypical sign mockups for Microsoft.
In another project for Microsoft, was working with Gensler on a prototypical, accessible, inclusive sign system for their campus in Redmond, Washington. Microsoft, they hired all sorts of people with disabilities, so they have them as part of their team for creating products, testing products, and really sort of maintaining proper function through all the different ways people use their system. So as they hire these people, employ them, it's important that they're included in the workforce, in their campus, and they realized they had a challenge for people, especially people that were blind, to be able to get around their campus. So this was taking their existing environmental graphic system to make it accessible, inclusive of everybody, so everybody could use the same systems.
Slide 35, photos of user group testing.
So there's just a number of things for the testing that went on, the prototypes, having people with different disabilities to explore, test, and comment on the different signage systems we were developing.
Slide 36, inclusive map and directional indicator mockup.
And part of it included tactile maps for map kiosk that you could read through touch or visually. And it was providing all sorts of information for accessible routes, for where buildings were, all sorts of things. There are also directional signposts that were accessible in other devices.
Slide 37, the handshake of a building.
But touch isn't just about that information. There's also, I think about touch at times like the handshake of a building. And it could be a handrail, a doorknob, places where you know people are gonna grab the parts of the building and have that experience of touching it immediately and having that kind of tactile experience. So in this case, I was thinking about how it wasn't just about sort of providing access into the architecture, but it was also an access into the delight or the design of architecture. And I was really curious how you could convey the sense of care or quality or generosity of the design for people that wouldn't see it. And it was important for me to think about those areas where people would touch the building. We know they would touch the building, to then enjoy that sense of care and delight in the architecture.
Slide 38, lighthouse handrail design process.
So a critical place at the Lighthouse for the Blind in San Francisco was the design of a handrail to go on their stair that linked their 3 floors together. And in this case, this is showing the design process of tactile drawings, of me working with wax sticks. And then, you know, it wasn't about the drawing, it was about the shape and how the hand would grip the handrail. So we did 3D prints of all the different sections that we thought had promise. And it was all about sort of crafting it to fit the hand remarkably well, to really surprise you in the grip of the handrail.
Slide 39, surprising grip.
And this is the final handrail as it was built and installed in the space.
Slide 40, sense of sight.
And also the sense of sight, which you might think of maybe a little bit odd, coming from a blind architect to talk to you about the sense of sight. And I have no sight whatsoever. I have no light perception. And I thought that was blindness. When I explained, I knew nothing about blindness when I lost my sight. I truly knew nothing. The reality is that experience of blindness, no sight whatsoever, that is only about 6 to 8% of those that are visually impaired, or in the US, what we refer to as legally blind. Most have some sense of sight, just it's a low vision condition, something where they don't see well. And the interesting thing about that is their sight, their visual acuity is very much a function of the visual environment, an environment that can either maximize or minimize the visual acuity. So you could take someone that's just marginally, just a little bit legally blind or visually impaired, but in the wrong environment, they might be significantly visually impaired. Their effective visual acuity in that space could be grossly and radically minimized and can have real consequences in their ability to function in that space. That's something I never thought about before.
Slide 41, cheater, he's speaking.
And so this area is really about people that have that partial sight. I think of them as, initially I thought of them as people that were cheating, they were peeking, like in the game of hide and seek as a kid. But it's really sort of a really challenging experience, and something that we as designers, as architects, really need to be a little bit more careful about, a lot more careful about.
Slide 42, benches left there in the shade and sunlight right there.
And this is some work with a group that I'm working with out of the University of Minnesota here in the US. And they have a low vision clinic led by a chief research scientist who's blind, a low vision scientist. So he has low vision conditions. And with this particular project, they were developing a filtering system that could be used for architectural rendering to demonstrate how other people with visual impairments would see the space, not with 20/20 vision, but how it would be seen for people with these low vision conditions. So in this case, it's showing a courtyard. This is a photograph of the courtyard in front of his building at the University of Minnesota campus. And so it's showing that space, and there's a concrete plinth that, depending on the light, on the time of day, and the weather of that day, you may or may not see that concrete plinth. And he knows it well because he doesn't always use his cane, and he's fallen over this little lump of concrete many times because at certain times of the day, he can't see it in certain types of light. So this is really modeling to show the importance of visual contrast, something that doesn't happen when you use the same concrete. Even if it shows at certain times of the day, because of the lighting quality, the ability to get really crisp shadows, and other times you can't.
Slide 43, stairs left there, no blur right there.
In an interior space, looking with time-lapse photography at different times of the year with 20/20 vision, the same space
Slide 44. Stairs left parent, severe blur right parent.
with a visual impairment, showing the impact of the visual accessibility of that space, the effectiveness of the lighting, of shadow, of high visual contrast in a space that doesn't perform so well.
Slide 45. Visual contrast and lighthouse stair.
So in working with that, in the lighthouse project, it was important on the stair to provide high visible contrasting strips on the nosings of every stair in that stairwell. So we worked to provide at least 50% visual contrast through a stainless steel strip in the dark wood treads, and in some cases at the first and last tread for each run of stair, 70% contrast.
Slide 46. Visual contrast and lighthouse signage.
And also in signage, it's important to provide that high visible contrast in signage to make that work. And in fact, to make things bigger, unfortunately in our codes in the United States, we're limited to a maximum character height of 2 inches in our accessible signage. And the low vision users at the lighthouse, they wanted 3-inch high characters, but that was, ironically, that was not allowed by code. So we provided additional signage above the required signage that provided that larger character sizes for the room numbers, which are really critical to understand where you were in the building. So just had to find some way to work around that. But it's all about providing good visual accessibility for people with low vision conditions.
Slide 47. Visual contrast and MIB Cafe flooring.
And then at the National Industries for the Blind, that other project I showed you earlier, in their cafe for their building, used high visible contrast colors and textures in the floor. So it really kind of zoned the cafe so you could know where you were with regards to the countertops, to the island, to seating areas and things like that. So there was sort of a pattern language of different flooring materials providing both tactile and visual contrast to help people be oriented within the space and move through it.
Slide 48, wrapping up.
So wrapping up.
Slide 49, UXD lighthouse K-notch.
So part of this is sort of thinking about your user, and I like to borrow from our friends in technology out here in the Bay Area. Something that's really big in technology today: user experience design. That used to be a big part of architectural design. It kind of went away in the 80s and 90s and early in this century, but it's really important. And really, unfortunately, learning from technology to bring that back to architecture and that idea of user experience design and thinking about them. And in this case, sort of a closing image of the reception desk at the Lighthouse for the Blind and Visually Impaired. If you're blind and you're a cane user, you need to be able to set that cane someplace. When you're having to exchange information, sign forms, do whatever, drink a cup of coffee, you want to set that down. If you don't have that, you just set it on the floor or you hold it in and it ends up hitting you in the face or whatever. So in the reception desk, we actually created these little notches so you could just lean your cane up against it. It works really well. And it's a nice little detail that they love there at the Lighthouse. So just a little bit about user experience design.
Slide 50, universal design.
But it also gets into the idea of universal design. And it's a concept I hope all of you are aware of. And here's the definition of universal design as coined by Ron Mace, the founder of Universal Design. And it's really sort of really getting at a different approach to accessibility in the idea of inclusive architecture. It's about design of services and products and environments to be useful by all people, regardless of their particular abilities about disability or whatever. But in looking at this, I get a little, I'd like to expand the way you think about that. It's not just about it being usable, just as I was concerned about how do you convey the sense of beauty, of elegance, of the aesthetic if you can't see it. It's really thinking about how to make that the sense of
Slide 51,
universal delight, about sharing it for all people, that sense of delight in architecture. And that's what we're really about. It's not just about the usability, the functionality. It's about sharing in delight in the animation of our life from day to day.
Slide 52, international symbol of accessibility.
And so it's about so much more than just mere accessibility. Here, the international symbol of accessibility. And it's about really thinking beyond that. And I found a really effective way of doing
Slide 53, disability awareness merit badge.
is oddly something I found when leading a merit badge for my son's scout troop when he was a young scout. And in it, if you read this, it's a really compelling and challenging statement to us as architects. So I'll just give you a second to read it. Sorry, I don't have it in Spanish. But in reading that, it says that a person with a disability isn't handicapped until a barrier is put in their way. Now, there are barriers of all types, but at its core, in architecture, those are things that we're responsible for. They're barriers that we put in, either intentionally or unintentionally, but they're by our design. So that gives us a really important role. That changes it from just complying with code or doing the right thing. It makes us realize that we have a profound impact on people with disabilities that designed wrong. That creates a barrier that transforms their disability, which might just be an inconvenience, into a handicap while they're using that space. That's a different relationship to disability. It's not about us or them. It's about the role we play in the design through the design of these environments for the people that use the space. So I'd like to leave you with that challenge, together with that idea of universal design, of universal delight, and all that we share through this idea of multi-century design.
Slide 54, thank you for my blind navigator.
So thank you.
Slide 55.
This was delightful, Chris. Thank you so very much for being here with us. This presentation it's totally perfect. Thank you so much for sharing your experience.
Well, my pleasure. Thank you so much for the opportunity.
Well, after all the inconvenient, we could keep the show on. The show must go on, and that's what happened. Thank you for your patience, and we're so sorry that we got hacked.
That's switching media controls to move the item, press the arrow keys.
Yeah, I'm sorry we had that interruption. That's really unfortunate. I'm sorry that it came to bear on your event. It's a wonderful event, and it's a shame that it happened.
Tap mute currently yes, audio settings button drop down. Tap start my video button to activate press space. Alert tap video settings button drop down. Tap start my video button to activate space. Alert video mouse tap video settings button drop tap open participants tap new share button to activate press space bar tap pause share button to activate press tap annotate button to activate press space bar.
To stop sharing my screen.
Shift tap pause share button to activate press space bar.
Okay.
Okay. Is it fine now?
Oh, there we go.
Perfect.
Okay.
So as I was telling you, we're so lucky to have you here, and people are expecting to are asking us in the comment sections. So would you mind if we ask you a few things and share your perspectives?
Sure. Yeah, I was hoping I didn't talk too long. I lost track of the time, and so hopefully there's time for some questions and answers.
It's totally okay. It's fine for us. We're so grateful that this is occurring. Thank you.
Okay.
We got a question from YouTube, and here it is. How do you know your work, your job is as you imagined? Like the final result, it's like you imagined.
As I intended? Well, that's an interesting thing. And I'm reminded of the first major project that I worked on after I lost my sight. And it was like the Lighthouse, it was a rehabilitation center for the Department of Veterans Affairs here in the US. It was a rehabilitation center for veterans of US military that had lost their sight. And it was a fairly large building. And I spent a lot of time reading the drawings through touch. And when I read a drawing through touch, I'm really sort of understanding it and really putting myself at that point of contact between my finger and the paper or the design. And it's like, you know, as a designers, as architects, we're trained to put ourselves in the space, not just to see the space, but to be in the space in our mind, to think about it. And I found that reading the drawing through touch, as I moved through the building, as you would walk the halls, I was actually in the space, actively imagining all the materials, the sounds, the sun coming through windows, all the different features, things I was aware of, but they were all the things we were involved with in the design. And so I was very active in building that model in my mind. And finally, years after, when it was built, I got to go for the grand opening and go for the tour. And what was amazing was that people were following me. I knew I knew the space inside and out. I knew exactly where to go. And other people, the other architects that I work with, you know, they were trying to think about where to go next. And they're like, just, oh, this way, just follow me. And it was hilarious because I knew that space. I was in it, and it was really confirming what we were designing, what we had in mind, and really being able to experience it. What was different was the time. It was a lot faster for me to go up and down the halls with my fingertip, just moving through space. And so my sense of scale, that sense of time moving through the space, was the one thing that was really different from what I had expected.
Oh wow, how awesome! Like as we can appreciate, you really feel the space. You are in. You touch it. You listen it, and that's incredible. Another question is, how do you figure out the landscape where you're going to place your building or your construction?
Yeah. You know, a lot of the same tools. You know, it's not just, unlike a school project, you know, as working in the office, you're working with other people. People are doing, you know, what they do best, and I'm part of that team. So oftentimes, I'm not necessarily the one doing that, but I can read topographic drawings. I do study existing condition drawings if it's taking over a site that has an existing building. Working on one now, and it helps to understand the new building relative to the old building in spaces, but also in reading, you know, it's, I say, I can read topography in the drawings. I can read trees, but you layer in all the information together. It does get to be a little bit confusing when reading all that stuff through touch. So I tend to simplify things, but you know, I find that in terms of understanding the site, understanding the sun, the winds, the movement, the sense of the site, what's there, and the possibilities, you know, a lot of that is accessible, and there's a lot that we can do. So I do that. I am involved in the siting of projects and the connection of the building to the landscape and things. So I do get involved with that. And it's, like I said, I think like a sighted designer, but with the overlay of all these other experiences to bring in not less information, but actually, I think, more information that all contributes towards that collaboration of the site design, the building site, the building massing, and whatever else.
Oh well, we see. It's incredible how to develop this way of thinking to finally came with this whole idea and finally see the space. We have another question from Professor Roberto, he says, if you had to found an architecture school, what would you propose to teach a specialty for architects, for the architecture students?
Yeah, I think that's a really great question, and you know, going back to the sequence of the badass chicken and the avatar. You know, that's sort of, the avatar is our way of talking today about that idea of walking in someone else's shoes in sort of this different new digital virtual world. But I think that getting ourselves out of our own personal experience into the experience of others and expanding that, and not just in a sense of accommodating others, but from learning from others. To me, it's a shame that I had to lose my sight to gain all these outsights, all these different insights. So I think to engage people with disabilities, people with different experiences, and quite frankly, to diversify our schools, our student bodies, our faculty. I think we need more difference in architecture. There's been a lot of concern about gender difference, gender equity in the profession. We're making progress within that. I think there's all sorts of other differences we need to make. And I think we, especially as architecture has such an important place in sort of going back to the Boy Scout statement, the role we play in creating barriers, or it's really about including or excluding people. That's an awesome responsibility. The best way to learn that is to have classmates, friends, peers that have disabilities. The best teacher is your good friend, is that classmate at a desk next to you, or on that virtual screen next to you. It's sort of sharing in their experience, sharing in their life, and learning from that, and expanding your view of the world and how you design and anticipate the world you're designing for. So I think, you know, multisensory design about empathy, and a challenge I give to schools is diversify your student body and your faculty.
We see, and as you said, that is the best way to embrace architecture, right?
Yeah, it's a lot easier to do that than to lose your sight or take on a disability. Yeah.
Absolutely. So due to the time, I think this is going to be the last question. We really want to thank the audience that are making all these questions. They're very interesting, but due to time, we have to make the last one. So from YouTube, this user says, after having studied in a traditional way and having practiced your profession for a long time, today, how do you think architecture should be studied today? What would be the key basic elements in a study program for young people who want to be architects?
Well, architecture is so complex today. We are doing so many things. We're actually doing so much more in architectural design today than we've ever done before. The codes just get to be deeper and more complicated, and we're faced with sustainable design, the need to reduce carbon, to imagine sustainable ways to grow, to build architecture, to conceive of architecture, to save the planet, to save our lives here on Earth. There's so much we are doing, including trying. Obviously, something I'm very involved with now, I'm very concerned about, is creating an inclusive environment for us to really sort of not accommodate, but sort of maximize all that we can get from people, from the diverse experience of people. And so, gosh, any one thing, it's hard to say, but we really have to tap to sort of expose students to as much of the broad spectrum of the practice of architecture, of all our responsibilities. Obviously, I'm keenly aware of and concerned about our relationship to that inclusive environment for the broadest range of people. People that, since I've lost my sight and joined the community of people that are blind and community of people with disabilities, I've been astounded by the intellect, the talent, the skill set, the drive, the resilience of people that tend to be cast aside to be different. But I've learned so much from them, and I see so much potential that I'm so just keyed into sort of realizing that inclusive environment to maximize the benefit we have to gain from this collaboration of the broadest spectrum of people possible. So.
Awesome. Yeah, and I think that is the future, an inclusive future for everybody. And architecture absolutely should embrace that, the inclusiveness. And first of all, we'd like to thank you, Chris, from the organization team, our professors, Mr. Roberto Guerrero and Pedro Orellana. Thank you for being here. They are the directors of this conference. Us as the organization staff, we're so grateful for having you here. Many people are saying thank you for this great experience. They're greeting you from all over Latin America, from Colombia, Argentina, and Mexico. We're so grateful, and thank you so much for being here. This is quite the end of this conference. Thank you so much, Chris.
Gracias. Thank you.
Don't worry.
Sorry about my Spanish or lack thereof. It's been a pleasure, and good luck to everyone.
Thank you so much, Chris.
All right. Thank you. Goodbye.
Goodbye.
Quiero agradecer a nuestros estudiantes y a nuestra arquitecta Camila Fuentes, quien ha hecho una notable traducción tanto de el profesor Chin y ahora del profesor Chris Doney, quien nos ha mostrado con la humildad, con la grandeza. Yo partí enunciándolo como un superhéroe, y realmente es un superhéroe de la arquitectura, porque nos habla, dice, de la vergüenza que le da de haber quedado ciego para entender la profundidad de la arquitectura, entender a los otros. Realmente me tocó eso, y es un aprendizaje de sabiduría en el arte vital de la arquitectura. Gracias, Chris, por regalarnos humildad, seguir puliendo nuestras tinieblas de docente, de prejuicios, dado que nuestros estudiantes son el futuro de nuestra hermosa Latinoamérica. Gracias, Chris, y gracias a Felipe, también a Catherine, por apoyarnos en estos eventos. Pues doy el pase a nuestro profesor Daniel Orellana. Pedro.
Gracias, Roberto. Muchas gracias a todos por continuar a pesar de esta interrupción que tuvimos, ¿verdad? A Camila Wirsching por tu brillante traducción, Camila, ¿verdad? Y no sé si estará por ahí Cristian Durán.
Pedro.
Por favor, Cristian, porque en realidad todos los que estamos en sala, que ahora somos solamente los que hemos pasado, se puede decir, las barreras de seguridad de Freshly, sabemos de la plataforma 1 y de la plataforma 2, pero para el público que nos está siguiendo y pensando en el intervalo entre uno y otro, nos hemos tomado un poco 3 minutos para que Cristian nos cuente, ¿verdad?, las bondades de la plataforma 2, pensando que es una plataforma que sometemos a su juicio y que queremos que sea, si es bien considerada por el equipo de Colombia, instaurada como herramienta de trabajo de aquí a los siguientes 2 años. Y por qué no pensar en el siguiente, en el número 6, puede ser un complemento, ¿verdad? Adelante, Cristian, 3 minutos.
Muchas gracias, un saludo grande a todos. Felicitaciones también al equipo, que ha sido un evento, desde mi punto de vista, impecable, con altos y bajos, pero impecable. Y muchas gracias por la oportunidad de expresar mi felicidad con respecto al desarrollo de la plataforma virtual. Es un trabajo que se inició a principios del 2020 y considerando la eventualidad, la contingencia hoy en día, hubo que buscar un camino para poder sortear las dificultades de esta pandemia que estamos viviendo todos. Y esta herramienta se generó con ese espíritu. Finalmente, en un trabajo largo, con el cual se contó con el apoyo de este equipo, de un equipo muy integrado, sólido, se logró desarrollar una herramienta muy potente para este tipo de eventos. Yo lo he compartido con colegas míos del ámbito de la educación a distancia y están muy impresionados porque es una herramienta nueva. Se tomó una herramienta que existe, digamos, pero se modificó para este fin. Y se creó una herramienta nueva que, gracias a Dios y al esfuerzo de todos, ha generado la posibilidad de que todos los participantes de este evento se pudieran conectar, pudieran revisar las ponencias, tuvieran acceso a las charlas magistrales, a las distintas mesas. Sin más que decir y darle las gracias a este equipo, darle las gracias a Roberto Guerrero y a Pedro Orellana por haber confiado en mí y en el trabajo que hemos desarrollado con mi pequeño reducido equipo de trabajo, pero en fin, estoy muy agradecido, feliz, me voy feliz. Ha sido una jornada muy educativa y para mí también en lo profesional ha sido un desafío ganado. Así que les deseo, bueno, a todos los participantes el mayor de los éxitos y si se puede a futuro estaremos pendientes para participar nuevamente de un evento como este. Felicidades, muchas gracias.
Gracias, Cristian. Y sobre todo pensando que esta plataforma queda a disposición, ¿verdad?, del Congreso. Ahora también nos vamos a tomar, creo que dura como 1 minuto y medio, pero queremos mostrar a nuestro equipo que estuvo detrás. Y después voy a dar el pase a Camilo para el brindis de cierre y con las pantallas abiertas de todos y sus brebajes en la mano.
Igual caro.
Como ven, es un un pequeño equipo, pero una tremenda tarea, como ¿verdad? Comentábamos en la mañana. Camilo, querido hermano, vamos a llenar nuestras
Hola,
copas.
Pedro.
Un saludo grande, un abrazo grande. El micrófono es suyo para el cierre y estamos llenando nuestras copas.
Bueno, no, pues no podía haber un colofón mejor para este evento que esa presentación de todo tu equipo de trabajo, Pedro y Roberto, que lo hicieron maravillosamente. Yo creo que nos han dejado una lección bien importante para el próximo evento. Yo quiero brindar por todos ustedes, por todos nosotros que compartimos estos 3 maravillosos días en torno a nuestras experiencias y nuestras investigaciones sobre lo que consideramos debe ser la enseñanza para la arquitectura, por nuestros invitados que nos han dejado tantas frases tan bonitas, tantas lecciones, por la enorme posibilidad de conexiones y de relaciones que nacen hoy en día y que ojalá duren para muchos años más. Por nuestros estudiantes que han soportado las dificultades de este aislamiento y que han tratado de permanecer en contacto con nosotros allí, conectados, tratando de sacar adelante sus procesos formativos. Por todo ello quiero brindar el día de hoy y para que haya un próximo encuentro. Un abrazo para todos. ¡Salud!
Salud. Abran sus cámaras. Salud. Un abrazo grande.
Salud a todos. Gracias a todos.
Salud, hermano.
Salud, estimados colegas y estudiantes. Gracias por acompañarnos. Larga vida para todos ustedes, maestros, estudiantes, y buena salud.
Amén. Amén.
Salud, salud.
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 Salud y felicidades a todos. Un gran equipo, un gran equipo.
Maravilloso encuentro, muchas gracias.
Maestra.
Gracias.
Muchas gracias.
Maestra, gracias.
Larga vida para todos ustedes, maestros, estudiantes, y buena salud.
Amén.
Salud, salud.
Un abrazo desde Argentina. Fuerte abrazo.
Un abrazo grande, Marcelo.
Que sean muchos encuentros como este, todos creciendo entre docentes y estudiantes y cada vez mejores y cada vez más conocedores de nuestro propio ser. Salud para todos.
Así sea.
Salud,
Salud.
Salud, Camilo.
Salud.
Y muchas felicidades en el año que se avecina.
Grande, Miro.
Es cierto.
Felices fiestas. Feliz Navidad.
Feliz Navidad, Marcelo.
Feliz Navidad para todos. Próspero año nuevo.
Colegas de la U de Conce, a nombre de la Universidad del Biobío, un gran abrazo, felicitaciones por la organización del tremendo encuentro y un saludo también cordial, extensivo a todos los colegas de largo continente. Y qué maravillosa conferencia, Roberto, la de cierre, tengo que decirlo, un lujo realmente impresionante escuchar. Yo sabía que iba a ser algo así, pero hasta que no lo ves y no lo escuchas es que es difícil creerlo. Muy potente el testimonio. Me acuerdo que al comienzo, cuando lo estabas tratando de contactar, no estaba resultando, y originalmente no iba a poder asistir, con todo esto, el cambio de plataforma virtual, finalmente lo tuvimos acá, así que genial, tremenda gestión, felicitaciones, y un abrazo para todos.
Un abrazo grande, Claudio.
Salud, Claudio.
Salud, Claudio.
Excelente.
Un abrazo grande.
No, muy bien. Realmente escuchar a los colegas de todas partes de Latinoamérica nos reconforta a todos como equipo.
Sigue abierto el micrófono.
A todos nos reconforta y realmente es una felicidad haber participado de este congreso, de este encuentro. Realmente, como te decía hace unos días, querido Roberto, cada año, cada encuentro es mejor. Este supera a los otros y así sucesivamente. Esperemos que el sexto también así sea.
Así sea.
Feliz cumpleaños, son 10 años que cumple este evento. Esto es una fiesta de cumpleaños.
Es verdad, allí nos conocimos.
Exacto, 10 años.
Claro que sí. Salud.
Muy bien.
¿Y sabemos dónde va a ser el sexto encuentro?
Buena pregunta.
Eso.
No, todavía no
Roberto.
se sabe. Tienen que participar, parece ahí, pero ya pronto se sabrá.
Vamos, vamos.
Se te nota.
Vamos. Voluntarios, vamos.
El momento.
Es un momento difícil, me imagino, para cualquiera poder decidir una cosa como esta, dada la incertidumbre que se da, que fue el 2020 y la que se está presentando para el 2021.
Así es, Miro.
Viendo la segunda ola que ha sufrido Europa, bueno, dicen que no sabemos cómo. Pero bueno, qué lindo sería Buenos Aires.
Muy bien.
Sí, qué lindo sería.
Wow.
Wow. Yo lo escuché.
Salud, entonces, salud.
Quedó grabado.
Yo lo escuché.
Quedó grabado. Esa es una preinscripción.
No, ni por asomo. No me arriesgo tanto. No, Camilo, no te tomes en serio, Camilo.
Bueno, también quiero agradecer a nuestra directora Claudia Hempel, que nos ha acompañado desde el principio de esta idea, de esta aventura, de este sueño. Y yo les
Sí,
digo,
Roberto.
aún no me la creo, aún no me la creo.
Sí, en nombre del departamento, no sé si estoy con
Sí,
el
te
micrófono.
escuchamos,
¿Sí?
Claudia.
Perfecto, Claudia. Perfecto.
Claro, como Departamento de Arquitectura de nuestra Facultad de Arquitectura, Urbanismo y Geografía desde la Universidad de Concepción, queremos ser parte de este momento también de cierre para transmitirles nuestro sincero agradecimiento en todo el aporte que han realizado estos días a todos y a todas quienes han formado parte de este quinto encuentro latinoamericano de enseñanza de la arquitectura. Pudimos conocer de cerca esta fabulosa red de académicos y académicas de escuelas de arquitectura a lo largo de Latinoamérica, quienes nos brindaron un espacio muy enriquecedor de intercambio, de conocimiento, ideas en torno a la enseñanza de la arquitectura, que esperamos haya sido también motivador para todos ustedes, porque para nosotros lo fue y mucho. Ojalá los haya logrado encantar con tantas nuevas inquietudes, inspiraciones y sobre todo con grandes desafíos que surgen y claramente seguimos teniendo por delante, porque esto siempre sigue y estamos en un mundo de permanente cambio en el que la arquitectura, así como la enseñanza, deben ir adaptándose a ello. Ya ven que cuando Roberto, sin quererlo, 2 años atrás, se decidía que en Concepción debíamos ser sede de este encuentro, jamás imaginamos que nos tocaría en este particular momento histórico de crisis sanitaria, con todo este vuelco de la educación a distancia y las plataformas digitales. Y esto sin duda fue un desafío especial para llevar a cabo el evento, y así también ha sido un tema transversal en todas las mesas de conversación, en las ponencias. En estos 3 días nos han ayudado a tratar de comprender este proceso que es global, y que nos toca y trae consigo cambios que quedarán instalados en los procesos formativos y en una nueva forma de abordar la enseñanza de la arquitectura. Entonces, nuestros agradecimientos a todos los arquitectos y arquitectas docentes quienes compartieron sus experiencias y saberes en los distintos ámbitos de trabajo, el sentir, la experiencia, la visual, la epistemología, destacar, como ya lo dijeron muchos, la riqueza de sus presentaciones que sin duda fueron un eje central de este congreso. Agradecer también a nuestros invitados magistrales con sus notables ponencias muy complementarias entre sí en su mensaje y a partir de diferentes miradas de la enseñanza de la arquitectura. Ha sido un gran honor tener con nosotros la mirada de Freddy Mamani, con toda su autenticidad y fuerza expresiva en el rescate de los valores propios de Latinoamérica, la mirada de nuestro maestro referente en los primeros años de la enseñanza sobre todo, el profesor Francis Chin, quien en el legado nos deja, entre otros, releva el valor del dibujo como herramienta de pensamiento inherente a la arquitectura, la mirada de Luis Longi, quien nos fascinó ayer con toda su energía en el cruce de experiencias que trae de la academia y de su ejercicio profesional, muy articulados ambos en un aula que se extiende y funde el hacer del estudiante con el hacer del arquitecto diseñador, con toda su creatividad a flor de piel. También la mirada de Úrsula Ex, hoy, esta mañana, con su articulación realmente motivadora, nuevamente del dibujo, como recurso que ayuda a pensar y a procesar fenómenos en la observación, y lo articula en este momento de la educación a distancia con el mundo de lo doméstico, que también se nos cruza con lo que pasa en casa, los niños, de cómo todo ello se entremezcla hoy día en esta nueva forma de vivir que nos ha impuesto la pandemia y que nos llega a los sistemas de educación de alguna forma también. Y finalmente lo que ocurre esta tarde con la mirada de Chris Doney, con toda la fuerza y enseñanza de la historia que nos transmite al compartir con nosotros su impactante experiencia, y de alguna forma nos remueve el piso, ¿cierto? Con todo lo que nos ha contado esta tarde. Agradecerles a todos que han sido un eje fundamental del Congreso y le ponen una nota alta. Y finalmente también, obviamente, agradecer a las escuelas de arquitectura y a todo el equipo organizador que estuvo detrás, tras bambalinas, detrás de estos imprevistos, ¿cierto? Que lamentable lo de esta tarde, pero se resolvió y era parte de lo que podía ocurrir. Pero no así se logró igual llevar a cabo el Congreso. También agradecer a nuestros docentes, Roberto y Pedro, quienes han estado a la cabeza de este Congreso, rol que han asumido no solo con gran profesionalismo, sino también con mucho cariño, muy en la línea de por el ser, para el ser y desde el ser. Le han puesto el corazón en el eje a este encuentro, supliendo de alguna forma esa mayor rigidez o distancia que nos impone la virtualidad. Me parece que le imprimieron un sello humano y ameno al espacio de conversación, lo que espero no haya sido solo mi apreciación, sino también compartida por todos ustedes, y yo creo que así lo es. Así que nuevamente muy agradecidos, espero que en una próxima ocasión les podamos enseñar nuestra casa de estudio, los campus de la Universidad de Concepción, de la Universidad del Biobío y nuestra linda ciudad. Bienvenidos para una próxima ocasión, muchas gracias a todos.
Salud, Claudia.
Salud, salud.
Salud,
Salud, Claudia.
Salud.
Salud.
Bueno, varias botellas quedaron guardadas para nuestros amigos latinoamericanos. Tenemos que tomarlas, no nos queda otra. Teníamos preparados eventos importantes, pero bueno.
Y bueno.
No va a faltar oportunidad.
Así es.
Sí.
A la reserva.
Sigue abierto el micrófono, colegas, compañeros.
Un saludo muy particular por nuestros alumnos, traductores también, todos tras bambalinas.
Excelente trabajo hicieron estos chicos.
Sí, un tesón, oye, una fuerza, un punch. Sí, sí.
Totalmente profesionales, totalmente profesionales, como si lo hubieran hecho 1000 veces antes.
Así es, así es.
Muy bien estuvieron.
Sí, yo eso es algo que quiero reconocer y destacar. Ha sido muy bonito ver al estudiante como protagonista de esta actividad, como quien lleva la batuta del evento. Eso me parece extraordinario, lo felicito y además reconozco en ellos unos profesionales increíbles. Maravilloso, lo hicieron maravillosamente.
Salud, Carolina.
Salud, Carolina. De hecho, ese fue el objetivo con el profesor Orellana, que nuestros estudiantes fueran los realmente actores de este encuentro. Y lo fueron realmente. Así que también me siento muy honrado por trabajar con ellos. Muy honrado.
A ver qué dicen ellos.
Salud para...
Profesor Ramos.
Salud. Profesor Ramos.
Hola, hola.
Salud y la copa.
A ver si hablan los alumnos también para que nos den su visión, ¿verdad?
Perfecto.
Quiero mucho.
Os quiero regalar una mano de fraternidad para vosotros.
Oh, qué hermoso.
Es nuestro agradecimiento, un agradecimiento.
Muchas gracias, Marcelo.
Gracias, Marcelo.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Guárdala que te la vamos a pedir cuando estemos en Buenos Aires.
En Córdoba.
Bueno, ya tú lo dijiste, en Córdoba.
Bueno,
tú lo dijiste.
2 ofertas.
Muy sí.
Bueno. Es el séptimo. El sexto está listo, el séptimo en Córdoba.
Ahí va
Córdoba.
Argentina, de todas maneras.
El séptimo en Buenos Aires. El séptimo en Córdoba.
Me gustaría escuchar a Felipe.
La ruta del gaucho.
Felipe Rubilar, cuéntanos tu experiencia.
Bueno, primero que todo, muchas gracias por los halagos. Me imagino que igual hablo desde la perspectiva de todo el staff de estudiantes, junto a Fredsley, Katy, Dakote y más compañeros que hay detrás. Agradecido sobre todo desde mi sitio, desde Temuco, estoy desde Temuco, ni siquiera estoy en Concepción. Agradezco esta oportunidad, siento que no solamente por el tema curricular, después que puedo decir que mi currículum pude organizar o fui parte de esta organización, sino que como estudiante de arquitectura, el poder sentir, ver, palpar, hablar con arquitectos tan reconocidos como Francis Ching, Chris Donny hoy día, que son internacionalmente reconocidos, Freddy Mamani, etcétera, increíble. Desde la perspectiva mía, como de mi puesto de estudiante, esta experiencia de poder compartir con arquitectos, ya yo como me estoy formando para ser uno, pero ya ver y ver perspectivas desde otros países, desde otras nacionalidades, desde otras culturas, me parece muy, muy, muy interesante y enriquecedor, sobre todo en este proceso de formación como futuro arquitecto. Así que muchas gracias por la oportunidad y muchísimas, muchísimas gracias. Sí.
Salud, Felipe.
Salud, Felipe.
Gracias,
Salud,
gracias,
salud.
profesor. No tengo nada con que brindar, con agüita.
Pero agüita, muy bien. Vale, no sé cada uno el brebaje de su elección, Felipe.
Catherine Valdebenito,
sí.
cuéntanos. Queremos escucharte, Catherine. Parece que fue a buscar el brebaje, Catherine.
Nos desconectó,
Un saludo a Camila con su traducción. Excelente, ¿eh? Te lució.
Sí.
Sí.
Fredly, entonces, ubiquemos a Fredly. Fredly, cuéntanos. Brinde, saque una copa por lo menos, pues, Fredly.
No, pues si Fredly tiene ahí un... ¿Sabes? Muestra la botella, Fredly. Muestra la botella.
No, ya la guardamos, ya sí, ese vaso es cafecito nomás y es para darle el tono.
Pensé que era sangre de toro.
Fresley asustaba un poquito, Fresley, ¿eh? Si no se callan, si te vienen, los echamos a todos.
Justo.
La mano dura.
La mano dura. Exactamente, tú lo has dicho,
Reglas para mantener los tiempos.
Sí.
¿Cómo fue tu experiencia, Fredly? ¿Cómo fue tu experiencia? Se nos cortó Fredly, parece.
Sí, creo que Fredly y Alexandra ya van camino a Buenos Aires, ¿será? Para preparar el encuentro.
Es hora.
Ya partieron.
Bueno, maestro.
Tome nota.
Tome nota. Oye, y las conclusiones de las mesas, o sea, yo tomé apunte de todas, son 3 hojas que tomé apunte, pero también están en las redes y están en los videos, y se unen a las conclusiones y las memorias de los 4 anteriores. Hay un material valioso para poder sacarlo adelante y para poder sacar paper o áreas de investigación o de profundización por nuestros alumnos.
Así
por
es.
nuestros estudiantes, perdón, corrigiéndonos, por nuestros estudiantes.
Me gustaría escuchar a la profesora Claudia Charito, que la conocí en Manizales. No sé si se acuerda de mí, pero yo me acuerdo plenamente de ella.
Sí, claro que sí. ¿Cómo le va? No, y aparte agradecerles, sobre todo, bueno, excelente la organización y todos los punteos que hemos hecho, como dijo recién el arquitecto Orellana, es realmente muy profundo. Hemos tenido el gusto de volver a verlo a Camilo, a Camilo Augusto también, así que de compartir. Miro también, nos vimos con la señora en el primer congreso en Valparaíso, así que un gusto de poder verlos y compartir de esta pasión que tiene que ver con la enseñanza, ¿no? Sí, totalmente. Así que ha sido un gusto. Esperemos, no sé si será en Buenos Aires, nos va a quedar más cerca, si es así, o en Córdoba, pero sí, realmente excelente la organización y y sobre todo los invitados también, ¿no? Y el poder compartir y debatir sobre la enseñanza, que es lo que nos interesa. Así que muy conforme. Gracias, Roberto.
Gracias.
Salud, Claudia.
No,
A
por
tu
favor,
salud. Salud.
Sí, a ustedes.
Salud. Hay un maestro que me gustaría escuchar, Pedro Ignacio Torres, desde Medellín. Maestro, ¿les puedo contar una confidencia? Yo no conocía a Medellín y el 2010 tuve que tomar un avión privado de estos chicos.
Ya sabemos la historia.
El mismo avión que tomamos en la noche, al lado mío sentado Pedro. Llegamos de noche a Medellín. Yo quería conocer Medellín y me dicen, no te preocupes, yo te llevo a recorrer Medellín. Pero me gustaría que lo contara Pedro mejor. Pedro, cuéntanos, cuando con tu familia recorrimos Medellín de noche con lluvia, yo mojado completo, recorriendo, pero emocionado de recorrer Medellín. Me fui al aeropuerto, dormí en el aeropuerto y el otro día de vuelta a Santiago. Pedro, quiero escucharte.
Sí, eso fue una gran locura. Una gran locura de Roberto. Felicitaciones de Bio al profesor Roberto, al profesor Pedro, al profesor Claudio, también gran amigo, conocido. Lo hemos tenido en fortuna acá en Medellín. Y a todos y cada uno, ¿verdad? Esto es de gran orgullo ver un evento de tan alta calidad y que nos han brindado en esta ocasión la oportunidad de repensar este oficio tan fantástico y el trabajo con nuestros estudiantes día a día. Sobre la anécdota del profesor Roberto, les cuento que era básicamente una decisión de vida, porque salimos de la ciudad de Manizales en un avión pequeño. Por la tenacidad de los pilotos, nos bajaron en varias ocasiones del avión. El tiempo era malísimo, pero él quería conocer Medellín. Entonces le dije, pues vamos, que si llegamos yo te muestro la ciudad, porque fue escabroso el arranque del avión y el vuelo, un invierno, unas nubes duras, en fin. Llegamos a Medellín y realmente nos transportamos del aeropuerto a la ciudad. Allí me esperaba la familia y luego empezó un tour maratónico al estilo Roberto. Anduvimos por muchos sitios que pude en tan corto tiempo mostrarle. Llegamos iniciando la noche, la lluvia era pertinaz, pero un alero de un edificio en el Centro de Convenciones de Medellín, que caminamos tratando de guardarse un poco de la lluvia. Me dicen, mira, aquí podríamos hacer un taller. De aquí a la derecha está húmedo, de aquí a la izquierda está seco. Esto con cerrar los ojos haríamos un taller fantástico. Y así anduvimos por distintos sitios en una noche de lluvia pertinaz fuerte. Y lo último fue subir a una panorámica de la ciudad, en un centro comercial que está en la ladera. Observamos la ciudad, arrancó en un taxi, durmió unas 2 horitas, creo, 3 en el aeropuerto. Después de eso ya lo hemos tenido en Medellín varias ocasiones. Yo en este momento iba a plantear algo, pero como Argentina tomó la batuta, esperemos que ya, si ellos toman finalmente el evento, en el siguiente Medellín sea la sede. Lo hablaré con las directivas en la universidad y estaremos pendientes del desenlace, ¿ok?
Buenísimo.
Gracias,
Okay.
maestro.
Wow.
Ahora estoy partido en 2.
Sí, así veo.
Entonces no me van a regresar el evento pues a Manizales ¿o qué? Yo veo que ya empezó a rodar por toda Latinoamérica y se supone que cada 2 años regresa, pero no tendríamos ningún inconveniente.
El cuarto, o sea, a ver, estamos en el quinto, o sea, el noveno.
Excelente.
No, profe, recuerde que la Nacional es una sola casa, con distintos cuartos. Y en ese orden de ideas, soy afortunado de haber visto nacer este evento en la Casa de Manizales. Y aquí estoy acompañado de un elemento que me regaló el profesor Roberto en uno de sus viajes, brindando con él. Esto es un pisco de una isla muy querida en homenaje a ellos, la isla de Pascua. Y estoy disfrutando de ella en el día de hoy, cerrando este evento tan fantástico. Y sí, trabajaremos en unión con todas las sedes de la Universidad Nacional. Felicidades y brindo por esta fantástica ocasión, por este hecho tan maravilloso para todos y que nos impulsa a seguir adelante. Nació eso y aquí va caminando en otros sedes de esta Latinoamérica. Salud para todos y para todos los profesores de Latinoamérica y los estudiantes que son nuestra semilla y nuestro futuro. Salud para todos y gracias por esto.
Salud, profesor.
Salud, profesor.
La razón de ser los estudiantes. Claro, profe. Aprovechando que está Camilo, ahí quedamos comprometidos a hacer algo entre los tres.
Sí, yo creo que podemos empezar con una cena. Por ahí, unos 6 meses después hacemos otra cena, dando a que otros colegas pues tengan el honor.
Claro que sí.
Muy bueno. También nos gustaría escuchar a Oricel.
Pero tenemos que ir por el vino a Chile.
Así es, lo llevamos.
Oh, vamos por él.
Sí, no, si vienen por él.
Los esperamos también.
Sí, vienen por él.
Muy bien. Oricel, te queríamos escuchar, maestra, si nos puedes comentar algo.
Muy bien. Gracias a ustedes por todo, de verdad. Y esto ha sido un sorbo gigante para seguir creciendo en nuestra labor día a día de todos los docentes con nuestros estudiantes. Gracias, maestro Roberto. Gracias a todos y cada uno. Y esperemos que...
No creo.
Gracias, maestro. Maestro Oricel, así que ahora tiene la palabra.
Bueno, yo llegué a este encuentro vía Claudio. Yo soy de República Dominicana y lamentando que no tuve tiempo de enviar un trabajo, pero sí teníamos material suficiente para poder presentar, pero ya en una próxima ocasión, ¿no? En otro encuentro. Y he estado gratamente animada de todo lo que se ha conversado en estos días, sobre todo la altura, y que hay muchos puntos comunes. Muchas veces uno se fija más en la diversidad, en lo diferente que somos todos, en las diferentes latitudes, pero hay muchas preocupaciones comunes que se han conversado en estos 3 días. Entonces, creo que por ahí hay mucho de dónde cortar y sería súper interesante poder tener acceso a las memorias de los congresos, sumado a y que desde cada escuela o redes de trabajos que se puedan armar, podamos como impulsar esas inquietudes que están latentes en la enseñanza de taller.
Gracias, maestra. Maestra Silvana, también nos gustaría escucharte, si es posible.
Sí, justo les había dejado un mensaje porque me tenía que retirar, así que me viene bien saludarlos personalmente, no quería interrumpir. Bueno, es nuestra primera vez en este encuentro que hemos entrado con Marcelo desde Córdoba, y ojalá algún día el 7º encuentro, como dicen, lo podamos hacer allá, estaríamos encantados. siempre serán bien recibidos. Y bueno, quería recalcar, y bueno, primero felicitar a toda la organización, realmente impecable en todos los aspectos, no solo organizativos, sino en lo humano también. Lo valoro mucho y nos ha llegado a todos la dedicación, el compromiso y la responsabilidad con que han organizado este fabuloso evento. En lo personal me llevo muchísimas inspiraciones, ¿sí? Estoy muy motivada y un poco creo que después de esta pandemia que en realidad todavía nos está acechando, y después de este encuentro y de haber escuchado a muchas ponencias realmente encantadoras, creo que no volveremos a los talleres de la misma forma. Creo que hemos cambiado y creo que para mejor. Así que les deseo a todos que tengan un hermoso 2021, que tengan salud y que sigan disfrutando de este proceso de enseñanza-aprendizaje, ¿sí? Porque por ahí nosotros nos ven como que enseñamos, pero en realidad es más lo que aprendemos también de este intercambio entre docentes y con nuestros alumnos en el día a día de nuestros talleres. Así que bueno, felicitaciones y muchas gracias.
Salud,
un abrazo, Silvana.
Salud.
Nos vemos pronto,
Salud.
será hasta el año que viene. Adiós.
Así será.
Salud.
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 Maestra Mariana Beatriz, nos gustaría escucharte igual, maestra.
Bueno, muchas gracias. La verdad es que la organización es excelente. Yo soy profesora de Historia de la Arquitectura 3 y 4 en la Universidad Blas Pascal. Comparto con Silvana y con Marcelo, digamos, la misma universidad en Córdoba. Y realmente agradecida porque es un encuentro que no solamente fueron las ponencias, sino en las mesas. Yo estoy de asistente y la verdad es que sí me abrió un espacio también para participar, para llevarme un montón de contactos, muchísimo aprendido. Excelente ustedes también como han organizado. La verdad es que muy agradecida. Ya pronto, seguramente en el próximo estaré participando de alguna ponencia. Digo, es como un viaje de ida, ¿no? Hablando en términos de viaje. Uno ingresa y bueno, y quiere pertenecer. Y eso es lo que se sintió. Así que muchísimas gracias.
Gracias, Mariana.
Gracias, Mariana.
Maestro, se me arrancó el maestro que tenía. Desde México, Guillermo Jesús Calva.
Ah, mira, ¿de Guadalajara?
Desde Ciudad de México.
Distrito
Hola,
Federal.
¿cómo están?
Exacto.
Buenas tardes. Hola, maestro Pedro. Hola, Leonel. Hola, Roberto.
Hola,
Pues
maestro.
justo nos tocó hacer
Hola,
un taller presencial con ustedes todavía en enero de este año, ahí en la Escuela de Arquitectura de ustedes. Planteábamos hacer el próximo aquí en México. Se nos cruzó a todo el mundo, como a todo el mundo, la pandemia, pero aún así nos dimos a la tarea junto con el maestro Leonel y Roberto de hacer un experimento, una experiencia realmente, una primera experiencia de compartir un encuentro académico entre México y Chile. Creo que fue en esa ocasión exitoso el encuentro. Tratamos de rescatar esa experiencia porque finalmente compartimos con un poco más de 500 alumnos un ejercicio de 2 semanas, y utilizando precisamente las redes, como lo están haciendo ahora todos. Logramos que diferentes grupos académicos de 6 instituciones de arquitectura pudieran realizar este ejercicio. Seguramente Leonel y Roberto ya les han de haber platicado sobre él, pero a partir de esa experiencia yo creo que se ha detonado en todas las áreas es la utilización de este tipo de reuniones, y que seguramente están alimentando otra serie de vertientes en torno a la discusión no solamente de la academia, del aula, de la vida cotidiana, sino nosotros justo acabamos de clausurar ahorita un seminario internacional latinoamericano que habló sobre los efectos del COVID en las ciudades y el hábitat. Tuvimos una participación importante pues, de ponentes magistrales de Argentina, de México, de Brasil, y tuvimos alrededor de 45 ponencias que fueron dictaminadas para poder participar en él. Entonces, a raíz de esto, creemos que pues tenemos las puertas abiertas todos para poder seguir intercambiando experiencias, vivencias, proyectos, ¿no? Que nos permitan crecer como continente, como América Latina, y seguramente, como lo vimos nosotros en el seminario, pues está desde el análisis de la casa, del cuarto, de la vivienda rural, de la vivienda urbana, hasta los grandes fenómenos metropolitanos. Y seguramente ustedes en su encuentro hubo personas de México que estuvieron siguiéndolo, alumnos y algunas, la maestra Estela Varela, que estuvo como ponente también con ustedes ahí, pues comentaron, obviamente, hubo buenos comentarios en torno a este encuentro. Y como veo que la lista ya para anotarse, para ver quién es la sede, parece ya estar muy competida, peor que los mundiales o las olimpiadas. Pues de una vez solicito, ¿no? Para la Facultad de Arquitectura de la UNAM, por ahí que nos anoten para en un próximo encuentro poder también ser sede junto con ustedes de este maravilloso intercambio de experiencias. Gracias, maestro Roberto y Leonel y Pedro, que por ahí también...
Un abrazo.
Un abrazo, maestro.
Va a tocar hacer unas eliminatorias.
Sí, unas eliminatorias, Camilo.
Mini torneo.
No hay problema, no hay problema.
Maestro Marcelo, maestro Marcelo.
Bueno, primeramente agradecer a todos, realmente fue una experiencia digamos, extraordinaria. Esto es mi segundo congreso. Me acuerdo justamente hoy estaba viendo por el Facebook que me saltaron unos recuerdos de hace 2 años exactamente, allá en Colombia, en Manizales, el congreso, que bueno, muy enriquecedor no solo por el contenido, sino por la cantidad de gente que uno se pudo vincular, gente que conoció, colegas, arquitectos, docentes, realmente, bueno, una organización perfecta, tanto aquella vez como esta vez. Me acuerdo de estas cenas con Camilo que teníamos los últimos días, con Claudia Charito, también Alejandra Ruiz, no sé si está también por ahí, así que bueno, un gusto haber participado nuevamente este año, y bueno, no descartemos que sea en Rosario también el dentro de 2 años.
Argentina,
Claudia, sí, somos varios los rosarinos que participamos, así que capaz que podamos organizar algo acá.
La fuerza del interior.
Exactamente,
claro que sí.
Exactamente.
Muy bien, muy bien.
Bueno, sería un gusto poder ayudar a la organización y ver si lo podemos hacer. Y nuevamente agradecer a todos por hacer esto para todos, ¿no? Y poder contactar gente y adquirir nuevos conocimientos. Muchas gracias.
Un abrazo, Marcelo.
Gracias, Marcelo. Mariana Beatriz, maestra. No sé si nos escucha, Mariana. Ah, no, disculpa, maestra, que ya. El efecto del vino, el efecto del... Sí. Profesor Tenoch, desde Guadalajara.
Sí.
Ah, Guadalajara, wow.
Roberto y todo el equipo, muchísimas felicidades, felicitaciones a todos, un gran evento y un gran cierre. ¿Qué enseñanza dejó este arquitecto invidente? ¡Qué barbaridad! ¡Qué gran resiliencia para todos! Y creo que nos falta mucho por aprender y en cuanto a lenguaje de la arquitectura, ¿no? Y que podemos desarrollar junto con la tecnología. Retomando ahorita las palabras de la arquitecta Silvana, que nos falta, claro que no vamos a regresar igual, vamos a reformular, tenemos que reformular, es una gran tarea. Propongo jornadas, creo que nos haría bien jornadas permanentes de lo que es la enseñanza, aprendizaje en la arquitectura, pues las necesitamos para reformular los modelos pedagógicos en nuestras universidades, en nuestras escuelas, sobre todo con los que recién van entrando. Tenemos que llenar un vacío que está sucediendo ya, y es precisamente la falta del contacto físico, y lo vamos a tener que que subsanar y que inventar otros lenguajes para llevarlo a cabo. Felicitaciones a todos, un gran abrazo a todos los colegas sudamericanos. Es un placer estar en comunicación con ustedes y es mi intención tener ese contacto permanente con todos ustedes. Otra vez, felicitaciones a Roberto y su gran equipo de todos, a Pedro, Daniel Orellana, felicitaciones para todos. Un abrazo desde Guadalajara, México.
Gracias,
Un
maestro.
abrazo, tenemos. Hermosa Guadalajara. Lindo recuerdo de allá.
Gracias.
Maestro Juan Esteban, se estará para escucharlo. No, parece que ya no está el maestro.
No.
Ignacio Galindo, nuestro ayudante estrella también. ¿Estarás, Ignacio?
Y aquí estoy. Estoy muy contento que se me haya dado la oportunidad de participar, si bien yo me incorporé casi en la última semana y cumplí labores logísticas más que nada, pero igual siento que como estudiante aún aprendí mucho con todas las mesas, sobre todo desde la experiencia. Fue una experiencia bastante enriquecedora y estoy muy contento. Siento que salió todo muy bien, independiente del desafortunado evento que pasó hoy día, pero así como en resumen, estoy muy satisfecho también con el resultado. Y es la primera vez que como estudiante también estoy en este tipo de congresos, si bien no como ponente, pero como ayudante. Estoy bastante interesado en seguir quizás más adelante participando en cosas así. Muchas gracias.
Gracias, Ignacio.
Un abrazo, Ignacio.
Estamos muy contentos con tu participación, Ignacio. Gracias.
Felices.
Me gustaría escuchar al profesor Fernando Saldaña de Sonora, México. Ojalá podamos conectarnos ahora, maestro.
Mi estimado, gusto en saludarlos. ¿Me escuchan?
Escuchamos plenamente,
perfecto,
maestro.
muy bien la voz.
Pues Roberto, un gustazo, de verdad, un gran evento. Saludos para Claudio, un gran abrazo. Lo mismo para Camilo, que tengo el gusto de conocerlos. No está cogiendo la cámara, no sé por qué razón. Pero bueno, de verdad ha sido un gran evento. Algunas circunstancias de conferencia no pude estar por cuestiones de mis materias que coincidían en horario, pero de verdad que ha sido un gran evento. Algo que me toca mucho fue que sí pude ver la conferencia del maestro Chris O'Donnell. La verdad, algunas partes de la conferencia pues tenía un nudo en la garganta porque yo creo que él nos enseñó a ver a los que sí podemos ver, pero es una gran experiencia poder contar con aportaciones de este tipo. Muchas de las mesas tuve suerte de poder escuchar. Me ha parecido que para todos, y por supuesto me pongo en primera línea, ha sido un aprendizaje, algo que tiene que salir más a brote, reconquistar el ser.